In this video today, we're going to be looking at the first group of people. Now, I want to make a note, first of all, for the people that might know that I'm going to leave a guy out. I'm going to tell you right now that I'm intentionally leaving guy out. His name's Peter. We're going to hit him after Easter. We're going to look at his story personally by itself. So when I don't mention Peter other than in groups or as a group as a whole, don't like, you left him out. Yeah, okay, we'll talk about Peter, but not all the way. We'll get to him. So, but the thing about Peter is he is often mentioned first. So he was kind of the leader of the pack. He was always kind of the one, I call him kind of like the hooray disciple. He was always kind of getting in trouble. Jesus was always kind of having to tug on the leash a little bit to keep him from saying things and doing things that embarrassed himself or Jesus or whatever. He was falling out of boats to walk on water with Jesus and all that. It was a big mess. And Peter was always that kind of guy. But we'll talk about him in a full video by himself. So when you talk about the disciples, we're going to read here in Luke chapter 6, verse 12. One of these days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him, which is kind of an interesting thing, which means he had disciples, period, like a lot of disciples that he was going to choose from, and then chose 12. So he chose out of a whole group 12 disciples, whom he designated apostles. Simon, who he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. And I like how the Bible kind of says that. Luke just kind of didn't mince words there. He just kind of like, who became a traitor? He's just a traitor. And so that was Judas's thing. Now, I will say that upon looking around and kind of preparing for this video, the disciples were usually listed in groups with certain ones always mentioned in the first front. And then some of the disciples we don't even know hardly anything about. There's very little information about them. But the first group was Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And Jesus called them, they were fishermen. And so they were doing their fisherman thing when Jesus is kind of like, hey, stop doing that. Come on, come with me. And then we have Philip, Bartholomew, who is also listed as Nathaniel in the Bible. Matthew, who is also known as Levi in the Bible. And Thomas, who made up kind of like the next group. And then the third group, which I said they're kind of mentioned last. We don't really know much about these guys other than Judas Iscariot, which we mentioned. So, as I said, we're going to spend some time. We're going to look at a few of these guys. But the whole group as a whole, why would Jesus want to pick these dudes? Pick these guys? He had my opinion, had a whole array of people to choose from. Okay, there was people who knew portions of the Old Testament by memorization. They could quote you at length parts of the Bible. And I can't even memorize a verse or two. And they had portions of the law, pretty much the first 5 books of the Old Testament memorized. And they could tell you what was in there. And that's how they kind of used that against Jesus later, because they knew what the Bible said, and what Jesus was doing was contradicting that. And so that's how they made their case, or tried to make their case. And so Jesus, but he had a choice of these guys, people who were religious people that grew up in the church, people that were there that could do this kind of stuff. But no, Jesus went after some of these guys. First, he went after these 4 fishermen guys. Okay? Now, the thing about fishermen is their people skills are probably lacking. Because they spend their time on a boat with other fishermen who act and do things like fishermen. And when they get off the boat, they kind of, having spending time with people, kind of probably suffer in that way a little bit. And so they're fishermen. They probably talk like fishermen. They act like fishermen. They smell like fishermen. All that kind of fun stuff. But Jesus said, hey, get off your boat, come with me, and I will help you fish for people instead. And so they're probably confused, but okay, you're not doing very good at this fishing thing anyway. Then we have Levi, Matthew. Matthew's a very interesting guy. He was a tax collector. Now, the thing about being a tax collector was he was kind of known as a crook. Because taxes would be, let's say, 5%, and they would charge you 7%, and put the 2% in their pocket and to give the 5% where it was supposed to go. But Jesus walks up to him and says, as Jesus went from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. And then that verse goes on kind of like, and people start to like, well, why did he go over there? Because he walked right up to his booth and was like, hey, dude, come with me. And people already kind of started to see who Jesus was. And so he's like, he's associating with sinners. And Jesus is like, whoa, I've come for people that need help, not for people who think they don't need any help. So Jesus kind of picked him there. And then we have Thomas, who is also known as Didymus, and we got him as usually listed as the doubter. And that's kind of his one moment of brokenness and weakness. We kind of get him as the doubter. He doubted. But Thomas isn't very much talked about very much. He's usually probably in the background. As I said, Peter kind of takes the reins on a lot of the things the disciples do, and a lot of the trouble caused is by Peter. But Thomas, this is his moment in the sun here. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said, unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. So he's just kind of like, nope, not going to do it. He spent years with Jesus, 3 years with Jesus. And he's kind of like, nope, I got to see it. We got to do this the right way. And then a few weeks later, or a week later or so, Jesus kind of downloads himself into the room again, because they're in a locked room. And Jesus just kind of like, boop, hologram, or whatever, teleport. And Jesus says, okay, here you go. Thomas is like, okay. And he believed in that moment, but it took him that moment. And then we have our friend Judas. And a lot to know about Judas. Judas is a very interesting character. One thing that I read is that Jesus kind of picked him as kind of so that team players, people don't always want to play with the team. And he betrayed Jesus. And he wanted to take that back. But it says in Matthew, it says, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with no remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. What is that to us? They replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. Now, kind of like so my next point is going to be Judas wasn't there because he wasn't there. So Judas just kind of like he couldn't handle what he had done, and he just kind of, after spending all that time with Jesus, and the thing about this is Jesus always went there with his disciples. So Judas knew where he was going to be, when he was going to be there, how he was going to do it. He betrayed him with a kiss, which was kind of an insult, and just turned Jesus over. And he couldn't take it, and when he couldn't undo what he had done, he fixed it himself. But the other thing interesting, and I learned this through listening to a podcast, is that none of them were at the cross when Jesus was crucified. Now, where's this little band of people? What is going on there with them? But it tells us, and we'll look at that a little bit more when we look at Peter's story. We'll find out where they were. But in John 19:25, it tells us that near the cross stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So Mary was there. Quite a few Marys actually were there. And Jesus looked out and he didn't really see his friend, except he saw John, who was writing this. And so nobody was there. Nobody was at the cross with him. In his moment of need, they all just kind of ran off. And he had a broken group of dudes that he was working with. And they constantly showed that. Peter and Andrew wanted to run away with a little boy's lunch, but they kind of took it from him nicely, and they wanted to send people away. They didn't want to deal with that. They didn't know how to deal with that. They were always making mistakes, but that's what Jesus wanted to show us, that he was with a group of people that were tax collectors and that was going to betray him. He picked Judas on purpose, because it said when we read in that first verse that he prayed over this. So he picked these people on purpose. And he picked Judas, who was going to betray him anyway. He picked Peter, who was going to have his rocky moments. And then he picked Matthew the tax collector. He picked Thomas, who was going to doubt him. He picked two or three other fishermen. He didn't pick like the wisest. He picked people he could teach. And that's what he wants us to know, is that he wants us to be with us. Wants to be with us, and he wants us to go with him. Because when we do that, we all learn things about him, but we're not going to have it all together, because if we were perfect, we wouldn't have needed Jesus in the first place. So he picked these group of people to kind of show us, I think, that no matter what we come from, no matter what we have done or what we're going to do, that Jesus can still work with us, and we can still be something for him, and we can still help him spread the good news and help people come to see Jesus. And we can also work at helping other people as we learn. And we can grow and change and see what Jesus can do through us. And the disciples learned a lot of things while they were with Jesus. Some of it didn't stick. And as I mentioned, we're kind of going to look at Peter again and kind of see what they were doing. But we're going to see what Jesus did in response to everything that I just said. All the betrayal, all of the moments where they weren't there, and the time when they needed him the most. And we're going to kind of look at all of this and see what Jesus did for them. But also what they do for him in return.